Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday and welcome back to another Wake Up with YPN. I am Jonathan Fell, your Vice Chair of the Iowa City YPN. And today we are getting a recap on IAR's 2024 Capital Conference from Greta Haas, Director of Government Affairs with IAR. Greta, I'm just going to take a minute before we kind of let you introduce yourself to say, if you're watching today, please do not hesitate to send us a comment with a question. We'd love to have participation, and we will get to them either, as the conversation flows along and you're watching, or at the end. But please don't hesitate to ask while you're watching. So Greta, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, your job, and how you came to be at IAR doing what you're doing now?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, YPN, for having me on this morning. So I'm Greta Haas. I am the Government Affairs Director with the Iowa Association of Realtors at the State Association. Have been here for about 2.5 years now, so the time has definitely flown by. Prior to being at the association, I worked for a smart buildings company on the marketing and communication side, and then also spent 2 sessions in the Iowa legislature as a clerk for a representative in the House of Representatives. Proud Drake alumni, originally from Wisconsin, but absolutely fell in love with Iowa after college and decided to stay here. So love this role that I'm in, getting to work on important housing policy. So not only do I do supporting our lobbying at the state legislature, but I also do fundraising for our political action committee. We are one of the largest political action committees in the state. Thankful to the Iowa City Board, does a fantastic job with your fundraising. Getting to work on Capital Conference, obviously, as we'll talk about here today, and then just kind of support all of the other advocacy pieces here at the State Association. So a large role, but get to touch a lot of really important areas of our association.
Awesome. And thank you for doing that. It helps all of us, be able to stay informed and keep up with policy and what's going on, and really helps us be able to better do our jobs also. So thank you for that. Can you give us a breakdown of Capital Conference and tell us why it is such an important event each year?
Absolutely. So I'm probably a little biased, but it is my favorite week of the year. Really, truly, the realtor voice is so important at the State House. And I really am so fortunate to get to witness that day in and day out with the lobbying that we do, but seeing the impact that having nearly 300 realtors from across the state come to the Capitol, show the realtor voice loud and proud is just tremendous. And so when we have every legislator have a realtor member that they can talk to, a constituent that they can rely on and talk to about housing policy in the community, what the market is doing, how the legislature and realtors can work together to create a more hospitable housing environment in Iowa, it is just tremendous to see. So this typically takes place late January, early February every year. We go up to the Hill, meet with our legislators, have important conversations on our really important housing policy. And what is so cool about the realtors is that we not only advocate for our profession, but we advocate for each and every consumer in the state of Iowa. And so it's hard to find another group that does that. And realtors really stand up for each and every Iowan, and the voice is truly essential. So one of the coolest days of the year. Iowa City had a great showing this year. Would love to see even more agents and brokers there next year, but just a really cool event to show the realtor power and the realtor voice at the State House.
Awesome. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the speaker at the free luncheon?
Yeah, absolutely. So prior to going up to the Hill, every year we have a free luncheon where we go through our talking points, but we also bring in a speaker to talk about a political topic. And so obviously we're in an election year, it's 2024. Things are a little bit contentious in the political climate, and we know we've seen things kind of trend in that direction over the past 10 years. And so this year we had Stephen Hawkins, who is the director of research for More in Common, which is a political research company out of Denver. He came in and spoke to our attendees during the luncheon about kind of this hyper-partisan political climate and how we can overcome kind of some of these trials and tribulations that we're seeing, to create a more bipartisan and healthy and strong community. And so what we talked about at this luncheon a lot is looking at the research that they had done. And a lot of times we view those with differing political views to ours as very far on one end of the spectrum, left or right. Correct. But when you actually do the research and look at how, people view these, we learn that there's actually a lot more in common on everyday issues between the two parties. We only really hear about the extremes, but I mean, the majority of us are very, very similarly aligned, want the same things. We may just have different visions on how to get there. So I think Stephen provided a lot of really good tips on how we can have, those conversations with people whose views may differ from ours, but really we have, a common goal in having constructive, productive conversations, so that we can push a good legislative agenda forward in a bipartisan way.
Awesome. Yeah, and like you said, we had quite a few members of the ICAR attend Capitol Conference. But for those who were not able to attend or could not attend, can you kind of walk us through briefly the 2024 legislative priorities?
Absolutely, yes. So 2 big bills that we really wanted to prioritize this year. The first is the Real Estate Transparency Act. So that deals with buyer representation agreements. Obviously, that is the hot topic in our industry right now. And wanted to make sure that was at the forefront of our conversations that we had during Capitol Conference. So what this legislation does is it requires licensees, all real estate licensees, to have signed buyer representation agreements prior to presenting an offer for purchase on behalf of the client. So we also, with this, are maintaining the current agency disclosure requirements. So those are not changing. And then in this legislation, we are not touching how compensation is paid. Obviously, that is still pending in the courts and litigation, and didn't want to put the cart before the horse. So all this does is say that new buyer representation agreement that's going to be required must just touch on compensation, must have a compensation section. So not changing the way compensation is paid, not touching on any of that, just making sure that these agreements are signed just like we have on the list side, right? You have a listing agreement with your seller, you're now going to have the buyer representation agreement with your buyer. So just really trying to mirror that on the buy side. So I think that it's a good piece of pro-consumer legislation, keeping the consumer informed and also protecting our industry. So
absolutely.
Yep. So that's the big one. And then the second big piece, again, we're really all about the consumer, right, and consumer protection. And so a trend that we've been seeing pop up more on the borders of our state, but it's starting to trickle in a little bit more towards central Iowa, is real estate wholesaling. So this is where a wholesaler will come in, a property may or may not be on the market, and the wholesaler will go to the property and say, we'll give you X amount of money to buy your house for cash right now. Then the purchase agreement will go through. Prior to closing, that wholesaler will seek out another buyer, whether that be someone that's going to use as an owner occupied or an investor, and sell their equitable interest in the property for a higher price to that end buyer, and then capture that profit in that transaction. And so we understand that there's a time and place for this type of business practice, but we just want to make sure that the consumer is informed throughout the process. And so it's called the Real Estate Wholesaling Consumer Protection Act. And what it will do is it will establish that clear definition of what real estate wholesaling is. So currently there's not a real clear definition in Iowa law of what that is. So making that super clear and transparent, and then also requiring that a real estate licensee be involved in the transaction. So either the wholesaler themselves needs to be a real estate licensee, or they need to utilize a real estate licensee. That way they are beholden to the real estate commission. There's, a responsible entity should something go wrong in the transaction. And then the next kind of big piece of this is also disclosure. So right now, a lot of times people are coming to the closing table in a wholesaling transaction and not even understanding what has taken place. And so requiring mandatory comprehensive disclosures is also a piece of this legislation. So these disclosures from the wholesaler will need to go to both the current title owner of the property and then also the end buyer. And so we feel like that will clear up a lot of the confusion that we're seeing, and just really, again, a good piece of transparent consumer protection legislation.
Yeah, excellent. So what is the typical order of the legislative process or timeline for priorities like these?
Yeah, absolutely. So the session typically lasts from early January to mid-April every year, but our work typically starts long before session kicks off at the beginning of January. So in the interim, we're meeting with legislators, talking about our priorities. I think we see a lot of our legislative priorities come from committees at the state level, whether it's legislative or risk management in the off year or the off months. Work with our committees, work with our members to get feedback on how we want the legislation to be crafted. So then we typically go and work with a particular legislator in both the House and Senate side. We typically try to work with the chair to get a study bill drafted, and then the Legislative Services Agency is the entity that drafts all of the bills for the legislature. They're some of the hardest working people up at the Capitol. I mean, write thousands of bills every year. So we work with the legislator to get that bill drafted with LSA. Bills are drafted, And then best practice is to have identical bill language in both chambers. And so once the bills are drafted, they drop in both chambers, then they get assigned to a subcommittee. And so these subcommittees are typically 3 members, 2 from the majority party, and then a member of the minority party. They will then host the subcommittee where members of the public, lobbyists, advocacy groups like the Realtors show up, voice our support or opposition for the legislation, and they take it to a vote. And so if this bill then passes the subcommittee, it will go then to the full committee. Typically, our bills run through either Commerce or state government, this year running through Commerce. And so then the full committee will vote on the pieces of legislation. And once it passes the full committee, then it will go to the full House and Senate for a vote. And so it's a lengthy process, but it's an important process to make sure that, all voices are heard throughout the legislative process and all input is heard by legislators. So
absolutely. So where are each of these at currently, and what should we watch out for as the year continues forward?
For sure. So we are sitting in a really good position. So this week is the first funnel deadline, which means that bills need to be passed out of a committee in either the House or Senate to still be eligible. And so thankful and happy to report that our buyer up and wholesaling bill have passed out of the Senate Commerce Committee fully, and then the wholesaling bill has passed out of the House Commerce Committee. We're working with the House Commerce Committee on that buyer up bill for this week, but because they passed the Senate, they are funnel proof and are moving ahead in a very good way. So we're sitting in very good shape, moving into first funnel, and excited to see those bills move forward with bipartisan support and no opposition. So
excellent. That's great to hear.
Yes.
Anything else you'd like to add that you feel is important as we kind of wind down today? Anything that's important for our members to know as relates to the charges given at Capitol's conference? Anything advocacy related?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, again, what I want to reiterate is that the members, you are the heart of our advocacy, right? You are the realtor voice. You are what make our communities strong. And our legislators want to hear from you. We want you to be involved in the legislative process. So every Monday, if you're not already signed up during the legislative session, Jen Kingland, our rockstar lobbyist, hosts a legislative update via Zoom where we update any realtor member that wants to attend on where our bills are sitting at the State House, anything we're monitoring, anything we should be concerned about. So that's a great way to stay informed. And then if you're signed up for those Monday legislative calls, you'll also get on Friday a bill tracking where you can see kind of where all those bills are in the process and if they've moved forward throughout the week or any other particular things we're tracking. Also, our marketing team here is great and does a great job of posting things on social media in terms of legislative updates. So be sure to tune into not only ICAR social media for any updates. We send lots of emails too. Be sure, realtors get a lot of emails, but we send some great legislative updates via email too. So that's a great way to stay informed. So be sure to keep an eye on those. And then just if you have questions, reach out to Jen and myself. We always want to hear from you. We know your voice is so important. And so that's the biggest thing we can stress is that your voice is heard in this process and that the realtor voice is loud and strong at the Capitol.
Awesome. Well, Greta, I think that is going to be a wrap up for us today. So thank you so much for being with us this morning. Thank you for all your hard work and everybody at IAR and for the work that y'all are doing to help be a voice for us in the Iowa legislature. So thank you so much. And I hope you have a great Monday.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye, Greta.
Bye.